All right, so we are here for this panel of nailing the ending. So hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea. I will be the moderator for this panel, and I'm so excited to be here. And we're going to get into this. So before we get into all the introductions and all the fun stuff that you came here for, we want to take a moment to thank Renaissance Press for sponsoring this event. They are a Canadian publisher dedicated to publishing, supporting, and uplifting marginalized authors. And thanks to their generosity, we've been able to include live captions with this panel, and you can find a link to them in the chat. So that being said, thank you guys for being here, and let's start with these introductions. So, like I said, my name is Chelsea. My pronouns are she, her, and I found this panel on Twitter, and it's just like serendipity. You know, when you just kind of like, ooh, other authors talking about authoring things? This sounds so fun. Let's join. So we're going to take a moment. I'm going to toss it to Tanya. And if you guys could please let us know your name, introduce yourselves, your pronouns, and what brought you here to this panel today. So Tanya, you first.
Hi, I'm Tanya. My pronouns in general are they or she. I'd prefer they today in general. I'm primarily a developmental and line editor, a wide range of fiction and nonfiction. And I find endings fascinating, which is why I was like, I don't know, I love this conference series in general as well. And I get really nervous at the beginning of panels. If you can't tell, I'm repeating myself and I forget what I'm supposed to say. And I know, yeah, that's me. I'm an editor and I teach writing and revision for Emerson College, and I will pass it on to the next person before I get too embarrassed.
Oh, good. Thank you for being here. Barbara, you are up next.
Okay. Hi, I'm Barbara Barnett. I go with she, her pronouns. I'm a primarily fantasy and horror writer. Primarily short stories, though there are novels in progress, but short stories are what I have published out in the world right now. As for this panel, you know, I recently read an anthology and it was kind of a mixed bag for me. And I realized that all the stuff that made me go, the problem was the ending. And I started realizing I have a lot of opinions about endings. Maybe I could talk about that. So here I am.
Sounds good. Appreciate you for being here. Celeste, your turn. Introduce yourself to the people.
Hi, I'm Celeste Hart. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the author of the Dragon Bones trilogy. And recently, I finally finished trilogy. And this comes after about a year of writer's block. And it's kind of funny that Diane contacted me about doing this panel and nailing the ending, because that was something that I really persevered hard for. So I feel like I can talk about it, or at least I want to talk about it, because I've been thinking about it for a year.
Sounds good. Welcome, welcome. Di, you are up next.
Hi, I am Diana Farrow Francis. I go by Di and she, her. I write currently primarily urban fantasy, but I have written and published traditional fantasy. I've published traditionally and independently, and I've got, I don't know, 20-something novels out there. I've been teaching for a while in universities and in various programs and in workshops. And as you probably can guess, the ending is mighty important to a story. And so I was really interested in this panel because I have opinions, as you know, others do, and you know, I'm eager to share them.
Always a beautiful thing, because that's what we're here for, sharing of opinions. And last but certainly not least, Ari.
Hello, I'm Ari. I'm just gonna go by Ari. Ari Augustine is the full version, but Ari is just easier to say. She, her, and I mostly do book editing. I do both copy and dev, but I work primarily with authors who really want to have more creative agency and kind of confidence with where they want to take their story, and kind of guiding them in that direction. So it's a mix of like reader response and editorial work, which I'm passionate about. I am forever trapped in rewrite mode of my Severing of Souls duology. It's currently in an overhaul because I wanted to take it in a completely different direction. And that falls under adult fantasy. So I'd mostly do adult science fiction, fantasy with a little bit of horror in there. And I wanted to do this panel because endings are actually my favorite part of the story, and not always for reasons other people agree with me on. So I think it's because my idea of endings isn't just limited to books, it's also expanded to television shows that I love and things like that. So a lot of my ideas of endings is storytelling in general. And I love talking to people about how things end, because I mean, that's what we remember the most sometimes about a story is the end. So hello again. Nice to meet you all.
All right. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. And like I said, my name is Chelsea. I go by CM Lockhart on the internet, and I do a bunch of stuff, but I run Written in Melanin Publishing as well as the Melanin Library. And I have 2 books. One is We Are the Origin. It's already out. And the second one, We Are Dying Gods, is the sequel in this fantasy series, and it comes out in August. So we're all here. So that being said, let's get into these questions, y'all. We have a lot of things to discuss, especially when it comes to nailing the ending, because Ari, like you said, a lot of times the ending is what people remember the most about the story. So the first question that I really kind of want to talk about is just like laying a blanket definition of like what makes a good ending, what defines nailing the ending, before we start talking about how to do it. What does that mean, in your own words? So Ari, since you brought it up and you said that's your favorite part, why don't you kick us off?
So for me, what makes the ending really depends on the genre and the form that you're working with. I find with science fiction and horror, there's a bit more forgiveness with quirky endings or unexpected endings versus maybe more traditional or mainstream science fiction, fantasy, romance, etc. So it really depends on who you're writing for and the genre you're writing as to what you can do. I think ultimately it's about completing the story in the right place that feels right for whatever your arc or plot is. And it gets harder when you have multiple plot lines and subplots upon subplots. But I hate to say it's subjective, but it really is. And it really does depend on who you're writing for and what you're writing for. So that's kind of how I define it loosely. I know that's not very good definition.
I think it's a great definition, because you're giving space to acknowledge that like there's room for interpretation. So Di, would you like to, weigh in on that and give us like your idea of what nailing the ending is?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there are 2 basic parts to, or really more three basic parts. There's every character is on an emotional journey, and then you have the plot, and then you have the denouement at the end, which for me is critical also. So for me, I need an emotional finish for that character's journey, and their journey has been about this conflict and the stakes and the risks that they've had to take, or the things that they've had to do to get to the end. And whether or not it's a tragedy or a happy ending, they have to deal with that end. So for me, the ending is emotionally this feeling that they have dealt with that in a way that's real and that makes sense within their character. And that's really important to me. And then the plot ending has to do with coming to wrap up the main conflicts of that story. And we probably will talk about cliffhangers, and cliffhangers are okay, but cliffhangers are not okay when it comes to that main storyline. That has to have been dealt with. And then the denouement part for me is the part where they kind of reflect on all that's happened and have a chance to let it seep in and think about ramifications. Because I, as the reader, I want that time to think about the ramifications to them and all and their lives and all that's happened. So there's kind of a forward look and a backward look at that moment that that for me as a reader is where I gain a lot of satisfaction. And it doesn't matter for me if it's a romance or a space opera or a Western or anything else, because the characters have had this journey and I want that moment for them to become aware of all that's happened that they've been through and have that forward looking moment and kind of have that moment of catharsis themselves that helps me with my moment of catharsis.
That makes sense, because it's just kind of like you have to have a moment where it's just like you sink in, and it's like as the reader, when the characters are reflecting on their journey, you get a moment to do the exact same thing and kind of be like, we've made it through. I've been on this journey with you for how many ever pages, and now here we are at the end and we're facing it. Like, what has all of this meant? It kind of gives it a second to breathe and add, not momentum, but add weight to what just happened and what excuse me, what your characters have, or the characters, not necessarily your characters, but what the characters have been through, And Celeste, I feel like you could definitely weigh in on this, because like you said at the beginning of this, you just completed your trilogy. So your characters have been on a journey for like a good little minute now. So what's your perspective on all of this?
I maybe it's a more vague perspective. I just love the feeling of when the reader walks away and they go, "Oh, that was really good." Like that's the image that I have in my head. I like endings where everything comes full circle, right? To me, a perfect ending is where you feel like you can see the beginning and you understand why we came to this end, however way that end might be. I want the reader to feel like everything happened for a reason. And I want them to walk away feeling like, oh, that was really good, how that was put together. It's just, for me, it's just a feeling. I can't really put it into any concrete definition, which was why it was so hard for me to finish the trilogy, because like really, like you set these high expectations for yourself, or at least I did. But when you finally do get that ending, and I feel like you'll know when you have that ending. It's really the most satisfying feeling as a writer, and I feel like you're going to pass that feeling on to your readers.
Oh yeah. It's like, again, that gut feeling. And I think it comes from an accumulation of all the things, right? Like from being able to break it down aspect, like Di said, of like being able to be like, this is what happened, and being able to sit with it, but also from the writer aspect of like, nah, I did this, like, this is good, this is satisfying, and knowing that I accomplished what I set out to accomplish. I think those things are very closely tied together, So Tanya, what do you think? What is your take on all of this?
It's wonderful coming after all three of you and being able to like absorb all of this and respond to it as well. Celeste, I love the way that you're talking about the intuitive feeling of like a satisfying ending. And one of the things I really like to do is to break down like, what is that feeling and what actually creates that that feeling of how it ties into the beginning and the journey and how everything has happened. I like to think of story as like, so the one universal thing about story would be change, that there's going to be some kind of change happening, that usually a story starts with a normal for the characters or the environment. And then the story is a journey to a new normal, which is pretty much the ending. And that's all kind of connected by what takes the people there, which is usually some kind of underlying thematic message. And all of that makes it feel like it's cohesive. If there's something that's happening and the story is an illustration of a specific message. And sometimes it can feel heavy-handed, and sometimes you don't even know that you're writing that message until you've written it. But I think sometimes connecting everything in that way and understanding how that fits together can create that kind of satisfactory, oh yes, this is giving it weight. This is giving weight to the entire story. This is giving weight to the beginning. And for me, that makes it really satisfying.
I agree. I have nothing to follow that up with. So Barbara, I might have put you in a rough position, but like, what's your take on it as well?
Okay. Well, At this point, there's going to be probably a lot of ditto to everything that's been said. Because yeah, for me, an ending should give me a sense of closure to character or plot, not necessarily both, sometimes both, but because I like a good ambiguous ending. But the idea, I think, from the main thing about an ending for me, I think, is that sense that some value of importance has changed or that some point has been eliminated. Because I want to be able to see the reason the author took me on this journey, even if it's not tied up with a neat bow. And whether, in stories, since they often kind of make promises at the beginning, and obviously you don't want to end predictably, but did the story fulfill what it set up for me? And I think that's what an ending that works well does.
Absolutely. So it sounds like the consensus is like by the end of the story, you just kind of want to feel satisfied with like the characters accomplished what they wanted to do. You have what happened and you've had a chance to kind of sit with it and be like, this is what this meant. Like this had significance. It wasn't just like I sat here for how many ever hours, for how many ever pages for something that just is going to go into the void, essentially. And
I would interrupt with one thing though, is there's lots of times that the characters don't accomplish what they want to do.
true.
And there's a lot of
Mhm.
tragedy, and there's a reason I don't read Jodi Picoult stories, because they make me sad. But I mean, there's those emotional endings that are satisfying in a different way, that's less winning than, I can't even begin to say what that ending is, because it's, for me, I just don't like those stories, but they're successful stories.
Mm.
Right?
Absolutely. I think there's a level of, not necessarily the characters accomplishing what they meant to do, but like whether they accomplished or not, they did, I don't say the activity, because that sounds kind of like, oh, we're going on a picnic type thing, but they did they set out to accomplish their objective, whether they succeeded or they failed. A lot of times, what is the phrase? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Right.
And so they're absolutely sad stories, and we're not going to get into that, because the way I can read books and I'm like sitting here like, why is this giving me emotions? What? I did not sign up for this. But
I will never read Where the Red Fern Grows again.
ever. No. But okay, so I'm gonna reroute us from sad, because truly we don't need emotions here. We don't need tears. But you mentioned, Di, in your answer, about cliffhangers, and it's just kind of like we just all like, I would say unanimously agreed that having a nice ending, everything comes full circle, as Celeste says, right? What about cliffhangers? How do we feel about those? And also, what goes into writing like a good ending, whether it is a cliffhanger or it does come full circle? Because we have a wide range of people here, from authors to editors to people who can tell other people like, I don't know, homie, maybe you should like make this a little bit better, so how do you guys feel about that, about cliffhangers and actually writing a really satisfying ending? Like, what's your 2 cents on the matter? And Di, since you brought up cliffhangers, I figure we can start with you.
As a reader, I hate them. As a writer, they work. People will pick up your next book to find out what happens, and they will write you and berate you for being slow about it too. I don't write a lot of them. I have written some. What I typically do is, for me, the cliffhanger usually has to do with, one, if there's a series, there's a series arc, and then there's a novel arc. So it might have to do with the series arc and set up the next book in that. So there's a satisfying ending with these characters in this spot. The action has finished. The emotional arc for this story has finished, but it might set up the next book. One cliffhanger I had, at the end of the book was somebody walking in the door and said, Cass has been shot. And we don't know if she lived.
Oh, wow.
Until the next book, right? And it was a terrible cliffhanger in a lot of ways, but it was also a good one because it didn't have anything to do with the previous action, in so much as that had been completed. The reader could feel good at that story had ended. but now they wanted to know what happened, what's going on there, what happened with that. So for me, cliffhangers work really well when it's the rest of the story arc going to happen. It deals with if you're ending a story about these characters and you're moving on to other characters, it might introduce or set up the next event with these characters and you want to know what happens next. That works really well in serial romance where you have lovers in this one and you're moving to a separate set of lovers. Or when you have minor arcs that can have cliffhangers enough that makes people want to pick up and read the next book, but doesn't make them angry. Like have you guys seen the books that people put up on for sale where they just kind of chop the ending? It's not a cliffhanger because it's not an ending. It's just I'm going to stop here and then you have to buy the second half of the book, but I didn't draw anything to a close. And for me, I'll throw that book across the room and hit the wall and I won't pick it up again. It makes me too mad. I'll read, I don't like reading reviews, but I'll read reviews to find out if that happened, because then I won't buy the book.
It's one of those things where it's just like, okay, this is, like you said, it's like taking a whole cake and then chopping it in half and then putting it in a whole box and being like, here you go, here's a birthday cake. You're like, wait a second, homie, where's the rest of it? And it's just kind of like, this is not what I signed up for. And then I understand what you mean, because I'm also that same person where it's just like, yeah, I want to know what happened, but I want to read it. I'll be scrolling the comments and be like, I know, where's the one that tags spoilers? Where is it hidden? Because I just need to know what happened to this character, you know? So I understand where you're coming from with that 100%. And you mentioned, how the cliffhanger of one book will lead you into selling the next one. So Celeste with the trilogy. What's your take on it? Cliffhangers and also just like writing a good ending in general. Also, Barbara, I'm coming to you next, so be ready.
I must admit to using cliffhangers all the time. My family that has read my books, that is the one thing that they hate about my writing, is how many cliffhangers I put into everything. But I really do agree with Di in the fact that an effective cliffhanger, especially for ending a book in a series, has to do with kind of sectioning off what's happening in that one book and then leading on into the second book or the next book in the series. But you really have to make the readers feel like you have contained everything that's going to happen in the first book. You can't have the main plot of the first book not be completed by the end before you lead on into the next book. So just to give a specific example, in the second book of my series, we have a conclusion where the characters had certain goals, and some of those goals were fulfilled, some of them failed completely. And then by the end of the book, we have another disaster that rose up, completely separate from everything else that happened. So it's, not necessarily a happy ending for the second book, but everything is drawn to a conclusion before we have to address the next catastrophe.
That makes sense, because it's like, there's that advice always, right? That like, your first book sells your second one. So I feel like cliffhangers, I mean, my personal opinion, not that I write them or anything, but I feel like it has to really set you up, because it's like you've mentioned, like you want the thing that they came there for that the reader came there for from the summary to be like tied up in like, okay, this is the problem. But it's just kind of like, when you have that giant looming villain at the end, it's just like, yeah, we got rid of the henchman. Now let's move on to like the general, But I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm trying really hard not to make anime references, but also that's where most of my knowledge comes from. So I'm going to pass it to Barbara and, let us know what you think about cliffhangers and like what it is to how to write a really satisfying ending.
Okay. Well, since I primarily been doing short stories, I don't write a lot of cliffhangers because I would piss people off.
That's fair.
So, yeah, short story don't do that. But as a reader, I like a good cliffhanger, but also, yes, like Di, I'm 100% with don't just stop. Like, there needs to be that. I feel like every time I talk about endings, it's all about closure. It's got to be, some element has to have been brought to a stop, or a stop or closure. I can't talk English. But yeah, so there's got to be something that has been tied up, even though we have these other elements that are clearly going to be like, oh my God, what's happening with that? Like, so that's what I think makes for a good cliffhanger. It's not just, and he fell off the cliff and we're stopping there.
Like, that's it. Good luck.
Yeah, done.
Okay, Tanya.
I want to circle back to what Ari was saying at the beginning about these things being really genre dependent. I think like having a cliffhanger in a cozy mystery or a cozy romance isn't going to go over well. So it's important to kind of step back and think of the reader expectations for a specific genre and whether that's going to piss them off or not. For a lot of types of stories, there's the expectation of satisfaction. And if you mess with that expectation, well, that should be intentional for a specific purpose. There's, I kind of want to step back from all of this and talk about the market and the publishing industry and how all of this works within that, especially for debut authors. And when I'm teaching at the MFA program, I'm working with people who mostly haven't published before. And when we talk about cliffhangers, it's also in the context of, are you going to be able to sell this book? If you're going to pursuing traditional publishing. If you're pursuing traditional publishing, you're a debut author and you don't necessarily have a way of showing the publisher that this book is going to sell based on previous books that you've written, then they're not necessarily going to take as much of a risk on you and they won't necessarily commit to a series. So even if you have a series, having the first book that you're trying to sell be standalone can make a really big difference in terms of people wanting to acquire it. So this is different with independent publishing or with publishers who are going to take on a series or who, but I think it's something that's worth considering if you're pursuing traditional publishing with your first book.
Absolutely. Because I think all of it is ultimately going to be connected, because at the end of the day, you know, when it comes to like writing the story and editing the story, reading the story, being involved in the story in any way, you want to know that it's going to be successful no matter how it reaches the market. You want the readers that you're trying to reach to enjoy it. So it's just something that you really kind of has to go into consideration of, okay, if no one's ever seen me and they don't know me from Susie's aunt down the street, how am I going to convince them that my book with this cliffhanger is going to A, be good, and B, make sure that they're going to want to continue reading, you know, the second book? Because there's also so much nuance to this conversation, because it's also like, you know, you can have a really good cliffhanger, but like, is the rest of like the 300 pages that you wrote actually really good? Like, is that solid? You know, this is just one aspect of it, but I 100% agree with what you're saying. And also going to throw the questions to Ari, and we are also going to make sure that we save some room for audience questions. So we are going to try to stay on topic, keep it together. So Ari, what is your take on cliffhangers and writing a really satisfying ending?
So as a writer, I think there are only from my memory, there are only cliffhangers in some of my shorter works. However, they're usually done in I would hope, a thoughtful manner. The point is to get the reader to think about it long after the short story is done, and to kind of more of a literary angle, go over and think about what it means for that character, for things to have ended abruptly. I'm not a fan of, I personally don't write like just a sentence and then the rest of the sentence gone. Like, that's just, I mean, unless you're doing it stylistically. I've done that with poetry before. And poetry people are like real cool with whatever you want to do. There's no punctuation. There's no such thing as grammar. There's no such thing as spelling. There's no such thing as form, but with genres, it's a little harder to write something that readers can kind of, I guess, receive in the way that you intended, if you don't do it with some intention behind it. As a reader, I would say I do buy serial romance books online.
Nothing wrong with that.
Because of the cliffhanger, because of usually it's paranormal, so but the cliffhanger does get me. But as a reader, I have found that if you have like an 8-book series and every single book has a cliffhanger, the odds that I'm going to keep buying your books after like book 4 is just starts going down. And the reason isn't because your writing is bad or I don't like the story. It's I get like burned out from the cliffhangers, and the cliffhangers keep ramping up my expectations, but then they're unrealistic. So when I get into the book, it's like what I'm expecting it can never live up to that. You're creating a living God with your story by book 8 that I can never truly worship the right way. So that's how I see it. When it comes to my longer fiction, I don't really do cliffhangers, because I think for me, completion, like coming full circle, is more important. I put more emphasis on, trailing off an end, but it's all complete when you get there. And I might do, I think Di mentioned earlier, like where you start the beginning of what might go on in the next book. But I think it's very important, especially with mainstream traditional publishing, to, if that's what your audience requires, to have your main plot thread, to have your main character arc kind of tied up in book 1. The sub arcs, the subplots, sometimes you can get away with not addressing those, but it really comes back to the fact that the main plot, the main arc, that's what you're promising readers. This is the crap we're going to put our character through, and they're either going to come out really great or really not, or something's going to happen. Got to find out. And you get to the end and you didn't get any answers. And I think that can be a problem with cliffhangers. In books, it's a whole other thing when you go out of the book medium, because you could just mess me up with anime, with K-drama, C-drama. You can make me cry and hate you, and I still love it, and I'll go back and rewatch. But with books, I think because there's more time and investment, sometimes it's a little harder, I think, to pull off cliffhangers with certain stories, especially in traditional publishing. Not that you shouldn't experiment. I love experiments. So you should still play with them. If you have never done a cliffhanger, you should try. Just do it once. Just to mess with someone. So
I agree. And I like that you touched on the fact that, there's like you said, there are genres, but then there are also expectations, and then also longer form versus, serial, and then how long you can kind of go before you burn out your reader. Because, after a while, like you said, if you've got 8 books in a series, after a while, I'll be like, hold up, like, can they accomplish something? You can't keep doing this to me, and we're not going to even touch on anime because Celeste knows me really well. So it's just like, I could go for this conversation for hours. So we're going to, we have a couple of questions in the chat. So we're going to answer a couple of these while we have time. And I do have one more question for you guys. So maybe we can like bundle these possibly. The question from the chat is, what are the differences between writing a satisfying ending for a standalone and writing a satisfying ending for a series? And I think those are really important distinctions to make, because obviously a series, you're building off of something else, whereas a standalone, it's very, individualistic. And like Barbara said, she writes short stories, and Ari, you mentioned writing poetry. Those also have different expectations. So we'd love to know y'all's take on that. And then also something I would say actionable, for the authors listening in, like what would be like, you've got one shot elevator pitch, like this is what you need to do to write a good ending, So those are the 2 questions, the difference between standalone and series, and then something actionable for the people listening. And who hasn't gone first yet? Barbara, it's your turn.
All right. So on the standalone versus series issue, I think the real thing is like the standalone, you need to tie things up. There might still be a sense that, you know, these characters' lives are going to go on because we want it to be realistic, but you've tied up the major threads versus the series. You're setting up, I think somebody's mentioned earlier, the next catastrophe. So we have some sense of closure, but we are clearly moving on to something else. And that, at least that's kind of like how I've done it with the few I've written on that, few novels I've written so far. As for actionable thing about endings, the phrase I love that I got, so I did the Odyssey writing workshop, and we always talk about surprising yet inevitable being the goal. You want to surprise your reader. You want them to go, oh, I didn't see that coming. But then they can also look back and go, I can, once I look back and see all these breadcrumbs. If it's just surprising, it's not going to work. You're like, well, that came out of nowhere. So it's making sure you lay the breadcrumbs, but not so heavily. Like, don't leave crumbs, not loaves, because you don't want to make it predictable. But
I love that you said surprising yet inevitable, because I feel like that's perfect for being like, yeah, it's like, oh, did I get you? But like, if you go back to the beginning, kind of like what Celeste said earlier in the chat, it's just like, when you get to the ending, you're like, oh, that was so good. And you're like, I have to go back to the beginning immediately and figure out how we got to this point, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like that's a moment, right? But then also, like you said, we're leaving breadcrumbs, not loaves. I'm not going to tell you everything on the second page of the book. So love that. Tanya, what's your take on, you know, standalone versus series, and also something actionable?
Standalone versus series. I don't necessarily feel like the ending itself, like the last couple of chapters or whatever, necessarily need to be different in a standalone book versus a series. But if you talk about all of the threads and how they're interconnected, that's a little bit different. I like to think of, you know, if you think of story arcs being like each book is like that, and then the story arc of a series is like an overarching thing. And so you have these, I don't know how well you can see these drawings I'm making into the air. You know, you have this here, and this one's starting to go here. So you want some kind of intertwining to happen between the threads of the story and the threads of the series. Does that even make sense?
Yeah, it makes
I
perfect sense.
Okay, yeah. And so that it's those threads I think are important to leave open, but I don't necessarily think that impacts necessarily the endings of each book as much personally. In terms of general advice, I guess it's going back to that like normal journey of change to new normal thing, is how can you represent that new state of existence in a way that's showing your readers what's next for those characters and in that world.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I mean, I have nothing
That's
to
a
add
question.
to that.
It's not really advice. Yeah.
I was just like, I think that's perfect. Like, we're going to leave that at what it is. Okay. All right, Ari, what is your take on this?
Have me follow Tanya.
Someone had to do it.
Admittedly, I don't work with a lot of standalones, and I don't read a lot of standalones.
That's fair.
I think the only standalone I've read and really enjoyed was Sorcery of Thorns, because by the end, the main story had been addressed, and then there was hope that Silas, maybe I shouldn't spoil it. There was hope that things were going to happen, and it was kind of like The Giver, where you had to sort of guess based on the information that was there, and I loved it. I think with this standalone, the one book is its whole thing, you know, that the story is contained within those pages, and then you can leave kind of wishful thinking at the end. I'm going to call it wishful thinking instead of a cliffhanger. Wishful thinking or thoughtful moment of just looking into the abyss. Maybe you haven't jumped. With the series, however, it's a collective whole. It's individual books that are part of a collective whole. And I hate to use the tapestry example, but you kind of need those threads to go the whole way through. Usually with the series, the themes, unless it's episodic books. I want to make a distinction there. Episodic books, it's
Mhm.
all self-contained, but in the same world. But in an actual trilogy or a duology or quartetlet, I don't even know what it's called after
series.
a certain point. There's just too many books,
A
so many
saga.
books. There's usually a common theme that's carried on in there, or it's expanded upon or deepened. And when you're ending one book, you're essentially tying up one component of that main theme. But then as human beings, every time we come to a conclusion, we always inevitably have more questions. And that's pretty much the end of each book in a series. The character arrives and they have a new perspective. They see the world differently. They feel differently. Or maybe the world really is different. But they have more questions now that they have to answer. In my series, I did that by just, the first book was her dealing with herself. Second book was her dealing with the big bad, because you have to deal with yourself before you deal with bad people. So, I mean, that was how I carried on the theme. So I think as you're working through your story, this is my advice, is to ask yourself what the overarching themes and messages are for your readers throughout the entire series, and see if there's a way that each book in the series can expand upon those themes, deepen those themes, so that by the time they reach the end of the series, even if you have some cliffhangers in between, it's leaving them moments to really think about the meaning of each book. And then hopefully you don't leave a cliffhanger in the final book, please. but
Let's not torture anyone.
They get to some people do that. Some writers do that. You get to the final book and you can really just think about the whole thing. And you probably won't even notice the cliffhangers at that point. It'll feel cohesive. But sometimes it still hurts when they do cliff.
I think the beauty of cliffhangers is always like when you get the complete thing, and like you said, it feels cohesive. When it's just like, ooh, I feel bad for you if you were reading this while it was coming out, but I love this for me because like I have all 4 books right now, so it's great, just, oh snap, this is where it ended, picks up the next book, continues reading.
The key is not to leave the readers waiting so long after the cliffhanger. I find the longer I'm waiting, the more angry I am about the cliffhanger. So yeah.
That's a whole other conversation, but agreed.
So don't write cliffhangers if you're a slow writer.
Basically.
That's why I don't, except for short stories. And 10 years later, they won't even remember how the first one ended. So
Fair. All right, Di, you are up, ma'am. What is your take on standalones versus a series and something actionable?
I write series, so just making sure that the book itself is. Here's the interesting thing: you have the kind of series that are ongoing, and you need people. You have to think about whether you want somebody to be able to pick up that book in the middle, out of place, out of the collection, and out, and be able to read it and like it on its own. Or do people need to read in order, or do they need to have read book 1 in order to read book 2 in order to read book 3, right? So there are those questions you have to ask yourself, and whether or not what the way you write your book then depends on your answers to those questions. Because I have series that I think they can be read out of order, because I give enough in each book to tell what happened before, and then each book kind of stands alone pretty well. I have others that no, you have to read it 1 through, or you're not going to really get the right experience. And so that's one question to ask yourself. And then when you're writing series or trilogy, or when when it's a fixed ending, like right now I'm writing a series that's an open-ended thing. I don't know when I'll stop, but because of the way I'm writing it, I think I can get away with that. Whereas when I wrote several trilogies, and I wrote a quartet, and I had the idea of the story arc. Well, when you think about the story arc in terms of like a 3-act or what have you, you have to think that the first bit is sort of the beginning, the middle one is the middle, and the end is the last book is the end. Well, but each book has to have its own beginning and middle and end, right? Problematical as they are, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, the one book, I forget the name of it, but I think it's like the 5th or 6th book, is dark.
The
It's
Half-Blood Prince.
unrelentingly dark because it is the Black moment as a book, right? And people were kind of unhappy about that. And I'm not sure she thought about that in terms of the overall story arc, but you have to, as a writer, to think about how that book itself fits into the overall series as you go, right? And so that's one thing. And as far as actionable, my feeling is that from the moment we are born, we are taught story. We absorb story and everything from jokes to TV to books to you name it. We know story. It's inside. So when we talk about, everybody's talked about that feeling of satisfaction, I think writers need to trust that they have that feeling and that they will kind of know that satisfaction when they get to the end. And if they don't for sure know it, go back and read the whole thing all at once and see if when you get to the end, you're like, yeah. And if not, maybe
reevaluate.
But I think we internalize it so much that it's there.
Absolutely. And I think that is kind of an underlying theme of all of our advice. It's just like, you know, you'll know when you've got the arc, like Tanya mentioned, and you'll know when you've hit something that's satisfying. It's just like there's the science to it, but then there's also the heart to it. And you kind of need both of them to go hand in hand. That being said, Celeste, you are up. Series versus standalone, your take on that and something actionable.
I read and write a lot of fantasy, and I play a lot of games. So my perspective is a little colored by that. Obviously, I think that like romance and contemporary and everything, like they have a different approach to series versus like standalones. I read a lot of historical romance as well, and a lot of those are positioned so that you can start in any book in the series, because a lot of times there'll be a set of brothers, a set of sisters, a set of relatives, and you can basically pick up the novel from any point in the series. And I think those are sort of different from when you're writing a series that builds upon, one upon the other. For me personally, I find that sometimes I have to ask myself, is this a series or is this a book that I can't quite contain into one story?
Yes.
And I think that it's really important to ask yourself that, because if each book in the series can't continue an overarching storyline and you're just kind of dragging things on, then this is a standalone. But like I said, I play a lot of games. I feel like each part of the story should feel like a character collecting each part of something that he needs to complete the whole overarching story, and then face whatever comes at the end. So for me, I think a lot of the best approach to writing that is to kind of, at least for you, the author, to know what they need to achieve in each book before they can reach the conclusion. Even if the characters don't know as they progress through the story, you as the author should know what each book contributes to your overarching plot.
Absolutely. And I would like to add to that, like, know what you want from your overarching plot, but also know what you as not just as an author would want, but you as a reader would want. Because I think sometimes it's very easy as an author to get into our own little world, because, the advice is always, write what you want to read, right? As Toni Morrison said, if there's a book that you want to read that hasn't been written yet, you must write it. But there's also the aspect of like, this is also a business, and like readers have feelings and opinions and expectations. So being able to acknowledge that this might be something that you have in your mind, but also like as a reader, is this going to hit that spot? Is this going to satisfy them? Is this going to be what you want people to remember you for as an author? I think it all kind of goes hand in hand. Also, we have about 9 minutes left before we have to wrap this up completely. So I'm thinking if y'all are okay with it, we can maybe do a speed round of some of the questions that were in the chat. So we're going to try to keep this quick, get through as many as possible. And Also, want to throw out for everyone listening, there is a Discord server. So if you have more questions that we are not able to get to on the actual recording, feel free to jump into the Discord where the conversation will continue there even after the panel is over. But all in favor of a quick lightning round of questions, say aye.
Hi.
Do it.
Awesome. All right. So, first question that I see is, what are some of your favorite endings? Tanya, you first.
Favorite. Well, I'm glad you had us prepare for this, because I draw a blank on these all the time when it comes to remembering books. But I was thinking about The Honeys recently, and has anybody else read that book? It's amazing. Love the ending. Not going to share why, because it would be a total spoiler.
Okay, we've got The Honeys. Barbara.
It's possibly a controversial choice, since I know this ending pisses a lot of people off, but Paul Tremblay's The Cabin at the End of the World. It is, I think that's how you do an ambiguous ending. And
All right, Celeste.
The first book in the 5th season trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. That one was really good. I love that one.
Okay. Die.
Guy Gabriel Kay's Tigana and Sherry Tepper's Gate to Women's Country are two that have stuck with me for years because their endings are so good.
Okay. Ari.
I had two prepared.
Okay.
I like The Perfect Match by Ken Liu. It's a short sci-fi story that is just creepy. It's just really creepy and makes you think about Siri in a different light. And then The Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. It just leaves you feeling good and cozy, but still kind of ambiguous. Ambiguous cozy, that's the term.
Okay, that works. For me, it would probably be Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Sandberry. It's a psychological thriller. It just released and it's so good. Oh my God, it's so good. Let's see here. Next question. What are your thoughts about ending a book with a subtle cliffhanger in order to age the characters in the next book? And this comes from Shannon, who's working on an illustrated novel. So I know this is a little more to it, but subtle cliffhangers, good, bad, ambiguous, how you feel about it. We'll go in reverse order this time, if you guys are good with that. So Ari, you're up first.
I don't think I've ever read a subtle cliffhanger. They've either left me trashed or I've hated them. I think if it works for your story, go for it. Have some other readers who are okay with open or cliffhanging endings read it. Not necessarily writers, because I think sometimes when everybody's writing together, they all get in writer mode. Have some readers read it to let you know if it feels like the subtle enough of a cliffhanger to work, or if it needs more oomph, they need to cry more. So
sounds good. Not rushing you, but die, because we're 5 minutes, you guys.
I'm not even sure what we mean here by subtle cliffhanger. I mean, a cliffhanger that
I think,
what does that mean?
if I'm being generous here, because there's not much explanation in the question here, I would think of it as like something where it's just like, it's not a like major cliffhanger like what you mentioned before. This person walked the door, Cassie just got shot. Not like major like that, but something more subtle where it's just like there's definitely more to the story, but as we mentioned before, like it's contained within the pages that it need. The story that needs to be contained is contained, but there's still clearly more. How do you feel about that?
I think if you're going to have a cliffhanger, make it a cliffhanger, because your reader is going to be annoyed with your cliffhanger. But what the point of a cliffhanger is to hook them to the next book, right? Mm-hmm. That's just it. It's to hook them. So give it a good, nasty, deep hook and pull them into the next one. Don't go subtle.
Okay. Don't go subtle. That sounds pretty good. Celeste?
I mean, I love cliffhangers. I kind of tend towards the don't go subtle side. But I would say that if you do want to put in a subtle ending, I think that ambiguous angle is probably a good way to go, where you kind of feel like you feel a lot of concluded storylines and plots and character arcs, but also you feel like there could be something more and not everything is completely done with. And I think a good example of that for me, at least, because I love the Avatar: The Last Airbender, was how that series ended without ever knowing what happened to Zuko's mother. And so you, as a person that likes the series, you would want to therefore read the comics that came afterwards, because it was still concluded the main storyline, but there was still more to understand.
I feel like that's a really great example, and also not going to talk about that because I know who I am. Barbara.
Yeah, I think a subtle cliffhanger can work, because probably if it's subtle, it may not even be recognizable as a cliffhanger until, oh, hey, there's book 2. Like if you're doing it like right with that, just leaving that sense that there is more, but it doesn't necessarily have to be more, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
my characters' lives are going to go on, and then we find out when the book comes out whether they did or not, you know.
When I finished my first book, which was called Path of Fate, I thought it was a standalone. And there's this episode of Babylon 5, if you haven't seen it, sorry. But the name of the episode is Whatever Happened to Mr. Garibaldi. And that was sort of what happened at the end of this book. I sort of had this question, well, whatever happened to that thing that I tossed in there and it was a throwaway, but really it's not a throwaway. I thought it was. Anyway, my publisher wanted 2 more books. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take that. It wasn't exactly a cliffhanger, but it was one of those ambiguous threads that didn't get picked up until it occurred to me, but it could have laid there and still the book would have been okay.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key to something subtle. It's just like it can, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. But Tanya, would love your thoughts, and then we're going to wrap this up.
I mean, why not wrap it up now? Because I feel like everything has already been said on this by everybody else, and I would just be repeating what everybody has said.
Okay. Well, that being said, go big or go home with subtle endings. That's what it sounds like.
This panel was originally part of the event Storycrafting Sessions Drafting. This was a virtual conference hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group, a social enterprise dedicated to providing accessible and affordable community and educational supports for writers. To find out more about the Weeknight Writers, go to businessforauthors.com/weeknight-writers. This event was also created in partnership with Renaissance Press, a small publisher dedicated to supporting diverse voices. You can check them out at pressesrenaissancepress.ca.